Good morning and a virtual welcome to all of you to the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. I am Maria Mercedes Tuya and under the Computing Administration Department, responsible for the Digital Scholarship Initiative at the Institute. During the academic year, we organized these digital scholarship conversations, hoping to provide the community with knowledge of digital tools and projects of relevance to the different areas of scholarship covered by the 4 schools at the Institute. In today's presentation, a virtual open house to Krateros, Dr. Aaron Herkowitz will give us a front row view of the effort to digitize the Institute's unique collection of squeezes of ancient Greek inscriptions, a project led by Angelos Haniotis, professor in the School of Historical Studies, that is available through open access as part of Albert, the IIS institutional repository. This project is funded by the Humanities Collections and Reference Resource Grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities and by generous gifts in memory of Fowler Merrill Smith and from the Charles and Lisa Simoini Funds for Arts and Sciences. Our speaker, Aaron Herkowitz, is the manager of the Krateros project and a research associate in the School of Historical Studies. He received his BA from the University of Maryland and his PhD from Rutgers University, where his thesis focused on democratic politicians in 5th century BCE Athens. His work in digital epigraphy has been recognized with several awards, including the Fulbright Fellowship in 2014-15. There will be time after the presentation to address questions and discussions. Please use the chat tool to submit them even during the presentation. Aaron, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Maria, and thanks to all of you for joining today. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to share a video that'll be about 20 minutes. That's kind of the main body of the tour. And I did this to try to avoid any of the technical issues that would undoubtedly come if I were just to pick up my laptop and wander around the room and hope for the best that way. So I'm going to share this video, and then when the video concludes, we'll do Q&A, and I'll be happy to grab items from the various spots in the room or answer any questions, chat about any aspects of the Squeeze collection, the Merritt Library, the Krateros project, anything that you may have in that respect. So let's kick off our video presentation.
Hello, and welcome to the Krateros Open House. I'm Aaron Herkowitz, the manager of the Krateros project to digitize the Squeeze collection at the Institute for Advanced Study, and I'll be your tour guide today. The Squeeze collection has occupied the same room, often called the Merritt Library, for the entirety of its existence. Before the beginning of the Krateros project, the space also served as the office first of Benjamin Dean Merritt and then of Christian Habicht. On your left, when you enter the Merritt Library, is the heart of the collection, a long wall of boxes containing most of the Institute's nearly 30,000 squeezes. The boxes and shelving were designed by Merritt himself, who was one of the first professors of humanistic studies at the Institute and who arranged for the creation of the majority of the Squeeze collection in the mid-1930s. Let's take a look in one of the boxes. The squeezes are organized by corpus of publication or by inventory number. Merritt's primary area of interest was the history of Attica, the region of Greece surrounding Athens, and he was responsible for publishing the inscriptions found in the excavation of the ancient Athenian agora by the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. As a result, the IAS Squeeze collection has a heavy focus on Attic materials, although we do possess squeezes from the rest of the ancient Greek world. Squeezes, for anyone who may not be familiar, are essentially paper negatives of a textured surface. In the case of the Institute collection, the squeezes are epigraphic, meaning that they record texts, carved mainly into stone. Our boxes generally contain somewhere between 40 and 200 squeezes, depending upon the size of the individual squeezes. The squeezes are carefully stacked inside of the boxes to avoid bending and to keep them in the appropriate order. You may have noticed that it is relatively difficult to see the letters on the squeezes as I've been flipping through them. This difficulty can be ameliorated by the application of low-angle raking light, which I am providing here with my cell phone flashlight. The squeezes are much easier to read in person, but the truth is that conventional photography struggles to capture and display the letters on a squeeze. This is one of the main reasons that the Krateros project uses a scanner with special 3D lighting, which you will see in action a little bit later on. The box that we are currently looking through contains squeezes of inscriptions published in the second edition of Inscriptiones Graecae II, a series of volumes covering inscriptions from Attica produced after 403 BCE. Specifically, this box pertains to inscriptions IG-22, as they are called, numbers 690 through 739. Initially, the squeezes in the Institute collection were only labeled with information about the inscriptions from which they were made. They had no unique identifying numbers, and so, in cases where more than one squeeze of a given inscription existed in the collection, there was no way to refer to a specific squeeze. One part of the Krateros project's work has been to thoroughly catalog the squeeze collection, noting the preservation state of each squeeze and providing them with unique IAS numbers. Most of the squeezes in the collection are in very good physical condition, especially for paper objects that are over 85 years old, but we take great care when handling and scanning the squeezes to prevent further damage. Since you've now seen the squeezes, let's have a look at the results of the Krateros digitization process. We'll stay with this box and focus on IG-22691, an inscription for which the Institute has 2 squeezes. This is Albert, the institutional repository for the IAS, which hosts images of our digitized squeezes with some attendant metadata to facilitate searching and browsing. First, I navigate to the Krateros community, and then to the Inscriptiones Graecae 2.2 subcollection. Then I search for 691 in that collection. At the top of the entry page is information about the inscription, and below are 4 images, 2 for each squeeze. When we come back around to the scanning process, I will explain why we scan each squeeze twice. Squeezes are not all that we have in the Merit Library. The library was designed as a state-of-the-art laboratory for epigraphic study, and in addition to the squeezes, Merit collected a formidable epigraphic library. Most of those books have recently been moved into the Historical Studies and Social Science Library to increase their accessibility for members, visitors, and faculty, but a few volumes remain for use by the Krateros project staff. What I've just picked up, though, is more special than your average epigraphic tome. While he was preparing the inscriptions of the Athenian Agora for publication, Merit kept extensive notebooks of his work, with at least a page dedicated to each fragment unearthed in the excavations. There is a great deal of variety in what Merit recorded about various inscriptions, ranging from as little as the word "no" with an exclamation point to extensive drawings, transcriptions, discussion, and bibliography. A frequent feature of the notebooks is experimentation with the restoration of inscriptions. Nearly all inscriptions are fragmentary. That is, only a part of the original text survives. One of the main jobs of the epigraphist is to attempt to reconstruct the missing part of an inscription based upon comparison with other, similar texts, and upon the amount of space available to fit letters into. Although most of the information in the Merit notebooks has been published, they are still valuable as historical objects in their own right, and for the glimpse that they provide into the living process of epigraphical research and publication. As you may have noticed, the notebooks are not in the best of conditions. After we have digitized the Squeeze collection, we hope to have the opportunity to digitize and rehouse the Merit notebooks. As we continue to move around the room, we pass by the cluster of desks and computers where, in non-pandemic times, the members of the Krateros project team gather to carry out the project's work. We are fortunate to have access to a full-bound set of the Pauli-Wissowa Realencyclopädie der klassischen Altertumswissenschaft, an old but unsurpassed encyclopedia of classical scholarship. We also have an extensive collection of analog information about the fragments from the Agora excavations, more testament to the deep connection between the Institute Squeeze collection and the American School of Classical Studies. As part of the record-keeping necessary for good scientific archaeology, the Agora excavation creates information cards for every object that they unearth. In the Merit Library, we have a card catalog with replicas of the excavation cards for every inscription discovered in the Agora. Beneath it is a filing cabinet with photographs of the fragments. I will pull out the cards and pictures pertaining to one particular inscription, Agora inventory number I4408, and bring them to the table for a better look. Unlike the cards in the American School collection, which have been updated over time, the cards at the Institute were left largely unchanged. Thus, although they often note connections between fragments, whether by labeling, stapling, or direct comment, they do not have the diachronic bibliographical information of the cards at the American School. Fortunately, the American School has digitized the cards from its collection, and they can be searched and viewed at ascsa.net. The cards record a variety of information, most of which is more archaeologically centered than epigraphically centered. Unlike the Merit notebooks, which very much focus on the text of the inscriptions, the cards focus on the fragments as objects, including the date, place, and context of discovery, the type of stone or marble, a description of the fragment's length, width, and height, as well as if or where it has broken off, and any decorative or architectural elements. For ease of reference, many of the cards also have miniature photographs of their fragments stapled to them. In most cases, there are larger versions of the same photographs in the filing cabinet, and for these cards, we will see those photographs in a moment. The photographs in the collection serve as an aid in the research and publication of the inscriptions. The most authoritative way to publish the text of an inscription is by autopsy, that is, by working with the inscription firsthand. Every quirk and foible of the stone can be examined closely by sight and touch under different conditions, so that the epigraphist can be as sure as possible about the letters. However, it is not always possible to work directly with an inscription, often simply because one cannot travel to the inscription and vice versa. A second best option, especially before the advent of 3D digitization, was the combined use of squeezes and photographs. The photographs capture the visual information about the fragments, while the squeezes capture the depth information. Many of these photographs were also included as part of Merit's publication of the inscriptions from the Agora excavation. It was expected that in most cases inscriptions would be published with photographs to allow other epigraphists the opportunity to verify the proposed readings. One final card catalog rounds out the set of major supporting materials in the Merit Library. That catalog contains a prosopography of ancient Athens, a more or less exhaustive list of the known names of people who lived in or were connected to Athens and Attica, along with the sources, literary or documentary, in which those people appear. Inscriptions are a critical source for prosopographical information, and Merit, recognizing that the thousands of new inscriptions whose publication he was responsible for would include tens of thousands of names, hired assistants to transcribe the major existing overview of Attic prosopography and to update that material as his work progressed. Anytime a name appeared in an inscription, it could be associated with an existing person, or a header for a possibly new person could be created. For several decades, this card catalog was the single most important resource for the study of Attic prosopography, and scholars would travel from around the world to work with it. On the cards here, we have a name that may be recognizable to many of you, Alcibiades. There are a variety of persons who possess that name, but the most famous is Alcibiades, son of Cleinias, from the deme Scambonidae, a general and politician in the late 5th century BCE. In the 1970s, John S. Trail, now a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, began a sort of spiritual predecessor to the Krateros project when he embarked on an effort to digitize the Merit card catalog. After entering the card information into an early computer database and providing some updates of his own, he published the material in the 21-volume Persons of Ancient Attica series. In this cabinet, we have a variety of squeezes and notebooks related to northern Greece and ancient Macedonia. Most of these materials came to the Institute as a bequest from the epigraphist Charles Edson, along with notebooks describing his archaeological and epigraphical work that are a bit like a cross between the Agora note cards and Merit's notebooks. For now, we'll use two of the squeezes from this cabinet to explore the scanning procedure that the Krateros project deploys. We use a WideTech 25 flatbed scanner with an imaging area of 18.5 by 25 inches. We have two of them at the Institute, one in the Merit Library and one in the Historical Studies and Social Science Library. The only difference between the two scanners is that we have detached the lid on the scanner in the Merit Library, and I'll explain why momentarily. When scanning squeezes, we try, where at all possible, to follow a uniform procedure. First, the squeeze is placed on the scanner bed with the face of the squeeze, that is, the side that was in direct contact with the stone fragment, face down on the glass, and the text oriented in a normal, upright position. In the WideTech scanner program, we have a preset configuration of settings. We scan in grayscale, because any color information on the squeeze is extraneous to the information from the inscription. We use the 3D lighting that I had mentioned earlier to provide low-angle raking light, and we create 600 dpi TIFF files for archival purposes. After the first scan has been saved, we rotate the squeeze 90 degrees clockwise and scan it a second time. We do this because the raking light from the 3D lighting does a much better job of highlighting perpendicular features than parallel ones. Thus, where a vertical line might appear strongly in one scan, but a horizontal line faintly if at all, a rotated scan will show just the opposite. The combination of the two images will thus capture all of the features relatively well. The two images can also be combined with a process called shape from shading that produces an approximated 3D representation of the squeeze. But what happens when a squeeze does not fit on the scanner bed? After all, not every squeeze in the IAS collection is as small as the one that I just scanned. Some are downright huge, up to 5 feet by 10 feet. To demonstrate the answer to this question, we turn to a second, larger squeeze. This squeeze fits on the scanner bed in one direction and can be scanned that way without any problem. However, when it has been turned 90 degrees, the entirety of the squeeze can no longer fit on the imaging surface. Either the top or the bottom of the squeeze gets cut off. To address this issue, instead of trying to capture the entire squeeze in one image, we take two images with enough overlap to stitch the images together using Photoshop's PhotoMerge utility. We cannot accomplish this by turning the squeeze around because the raking light would make the two images incompatible. The squeeze must remain in the same orientation. It is for this reason that the hinges holding the lid of the scanner on have been detached. Otherwise, they would prevent us from successfully imaging squeezes larger than the scanner bed. Even after we have photo-merged the images, we keep the original partial images so that anyone worried about distortions introduced by photo merging can access unaltered scans. All of our scanned images, regardless of whether they're photo-merged, have several adjustments made in Photoshop to improve readability. Specifically, we reduce the brightness and increase the contrast of the images. We also rotate the images so that the text is oriented upright, and we unmirror them. Since the squeezes are negatives, they read like mirror images, but it is easy and unobtrusive to fix this aspect in Photoshop. Just as with the photo-merged files, we keep unaltered archival copies of every scan. Before we wrap up the tour, a little glimpse into the future of the Krateros project for you. When the project was awarded an NEH grant last year, the grant plan included applying 3D digitization to the collection, in addition to the two-dimensional scanning that you've just seen. At the end of March, project associate Maria O'Leary and I spent 3 days conducting test photography for photogrammetry, a type of imaging that uses a carefully captured image set from a DSLR camera to create a highly accurate 3D mesh of an object. With consultation from Cultural Heritage Imaging, we are currently working to determine the appropriate equipment and workflow to 3D image as much of the collection as accurately as possible over the next 2 years. The resulting 3D models will be useful in a variety of respects. For one thing, they capture a much more detailed snapshot of the squeezes in the collection, which can be used both for epigraphic work as well as curatorial work. They also add an additional layer of data for potential analysis by neural networks and AI algorithms, and can even be 3D printed to create pedagogical tools for instructors without easy access to inscriptions or squeezes. As I return our squeezes to the cabinet, we round into the end of our tour. All that remains now is to thank our funders, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Charles and Lisa Simone Fund for Arts and Sciences, and funding in memory of Fowler Merle Smith. And thanks to all of you for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed the tour and that you'll come visit in person when normal travel is possible again.
I hope that you enjoyed the video. Now I'm very happy to answer or do my best to answer any questions that you may have, or snag any objects to try to bring them over, although we're a little limited by the webcam that we have here, which is not going to do quite as good a job of capturing things as the camera that I used for the video. Okay, so yeah, I have a question in the chat from Paula. Do you have a system for describing the preservation state of the squeezes? And if so, would you be willing to share it? Yeah, so we do have a system for that, a lot of which comes down to kind of abbreviations so that you can make notations for yourself relatively quickly while you're going through and cataloging the materials. And when we had the CCAHA, who are a cultural heritage conservation group, come by to assess the collection, they gave us a little bit of an overview of the types of damage that are particularly important in assessing how likely a squeeze or a paper piece of art is to lose structural integrity, and thence kind of how much it would cost to repair those kinds of issues. So we have kind of a written up sheet that describes what the major notes are and how we write them. And I'm happy to share that with anyone who's interested, because it's a lot of it, and it will depend a little bit on your particular collection. A lot of it circles around things like tape and staples, which are often applied, but not always applied. And so we're looking for things like, does it have staples? Have the staples rusted? Are the staples necessary to hold the squeeze or squeezes together? Does it have tape? Did it have tape? Is there tape residue on there? Does that residue actually impact your ability to read the squeezes, or is it just kind of there? Because as I said, when we were doing the scanning, in some ways, the color information isn't that important. So if all you've got is a little bit of discoloration, then you have to think about whether that's something that you want to address or not. Let's see. Okay. And Kevin Clinton had a question. Is Krateros acquiring squeezes of new documents that have recently been published? And I think Angelos could speak to this a little bit, but I think in general, we're very happy to receive squeezes that are being produced of more recent excavations or newer documents or that sort of thing, because we don't specifically run excavations. We don't necessarily go out to make new squeezes, or that's not something that we've done to this point. But certainly if individual scholars who have collections of squeezes are unsure about how to kind of ensure that that collection of squeezes will continue to be used and accessed and preserved after they're no longer using that collection, we are happy to take collections on and add them to what we have.
I can say a couple of words. Essentially, what Aaron said is correct. That is, we do not systematically collect new squeezes, but we do have some offers either by people who have come to the Institute as members or by members of the Institute. For instance, I will give to the collection the squeezes that I have made, not many, in Aphrodisias. And Aphrodisias, there's a difficulty that sometimes you run the risk when you export squeezes that you are going to be stopped at the customs and try to explain to the customs officer that you are not stealing valuable Turkish antiquities. But we also, I have squeezes from Crete. We're starting an excavation in Litos on Crete. So squeezes that are going to be made there are going to be also part of the collection. But I think that the most important thing is what Aaron said. We already have a valuable collection. So if any one of you has a collection of squeezes and doesn't know what to do with them, we are more than willing to provide a house for them. And we're also in cooperation with other digitization projects. For instance, the Berlin Academy of Sciences, that has probably the largest collection of the squeezes in the world, the Inscriptiones Graecae collection, are also planning to digitize them following the same more or less model that we do. Thanks, Aaron, for this very nice presentation.
Thank you, Angelos. So I have a question from Alexander Nagel. On Western Asia squeezes, Iraq and Iran, we have in the Smithsonian, I investigated since 2009 and published, we do have pigments. Have you identified any traces of paint? So to my knowledge, we haven't identified any traces of paint on the squeezes. It's not something that we have systematically looked for while I've been here. It's something that we will be more likely to catch using the 3D digitization, the photogrammetry, assuming that that's the technique that we move forward with, because since that's done with a DSLR and in color, it will capture that kind of information. But we haven't done tests specifically designed to detect pigmentation. And I'll say that I haven't noticed any kind of obvious instances of that. It's possible that some of it, if it did exist, may have worn away over the 80, 85 years that a lot of these were used. But it's certainly possible that that does exist on some of the squeezes, and that we'll hopefully find that out as we continue with the project. Okay, question from Mariana. Do you have any squeezes of unpublished inscriptions? And if you do, where do they come from? Yes, we have actually quite a few squeezes of unpublished inscriptions from several places. The kind of heart of the collection, which was made by Merit in the 30s, the mid 30s, was made from the Agora collection, the inscriptions in the Epigraphical Museum in Athens, and some of the peripheral areas of Attica, so Eleusis, the Acropolis, those spots. And a fair number of the inscriptions, both in the Epigraphical Museum and at the Agora, have still not to this point been published. And so those squeezes are more restricted. So when we put images up on Albert, the open access images, those are only of inscriptions that have already been published. We do digitize all of the squeezes because it's a preservation thing, just as much as it's an open access thing. And we try to keep an eye on new publications, and this is made somewhat easier by Angelos being in charge of the SEG, so he has a pretty good idea about new epigraphic publications. And as things are published, we can add them to the list of things that are kind of openly and publicly available. And we also have some kind of sub-collections, including some set of squeezes from Louis Robert, some of which again are of unpublished inscriptions, and the same caveats apply to those. Okay, Marilyn has a question. Do you have a search method for matching fragments? No, it's something that I was interested in going back to when I was doing photogrammetry and RTI, so 3D digitization work with inscriptions directly a little bit at the Epigraphical Museum in the Agora in Athens back in 2014, 2015. My feeling about it is that I'm not sure that the digitization of the squeezes specifically will help with kind of matching up fragment pieces for inscriptions that perhaps join, but joins haven't been identified for, because a lot of that join work is done either by virtue of identifying common text, so seeing that something must join because the letters are the same, and then it becomes apparent that we're talking about the same issue in the inscription, or by noticing physical joins. And the physical joins are usually going to be sides of the fragments, and of course the squeezes don't really capture the sides of the fragments. They're almost exclusively made of the face, the inscribed face of the fragment. So there's some work being done using AI and neural networks to try to reconstruct texts. I know Tia Summershield is one of the big drivers on a project working on that at Oxford and in Europe. And that kind of work may start to help with matching up fragments on the textual side. And then if this kind of digitization is applied to fragments, stone fragments in the round, I think that there's a lot of potential for creating computer programs that will be good at trying to say, hey, there's a 50% chance that these two fragments join. Someone should come take a look at it and try to assess that. Okay, another question from Paula. Have you or will you integrate the photographs and the squeeze scans at the user end? So the photographs from the American School collection, my understanding is that almost all of those are photographs that have already been published. And so most of those are available through the American Schools archives, the ascsa.net. The ones that are not because they're of unpublished inscriptions. So we are in touch with, and will continue to be in touch with, the Agora excavation folks to make sure that, if we have materials that they don't have or that weren't published in Hesperia or the Agora series of volumes, that we get those scanned and do make sure that we can make those available. But in the cases that they're already published in Hesperia, then those images will generally be available through JSTOR. And in the cases that they're just kind of more general photography, they tend to be on the American School archive. Certainly the squeeze scans, both the ones that we do with the 2D scanner and the ones that we do 3D, the plan is for those to be made available. The ones that are 2D are already being made available and will continue to be open access over the Albert Archive. The photogrammetry is a little bit more complicated because the files end up being much larger. So we already, when we scan at 600 DPI TIFF, we compress that a couple of times. We bring it down to 300 DPI and make them JPEGs and put that online, because that's more moderately sized for people to be able to download, open in their browser, not take up a ton of space. And then if people think that there's a particular squeeze that they want to see the archival version of, it's very easy for us to send it to them. And that's likely the same approach that we would take with the photogrammetry. Is we'll indicate that we have, a mesh and object file, all the photography for this squeeze. And if you're interested, you can get in touch and we'll facilitate a direct transfer of the files, so that on both sides, the internet overhead isn't too strenuous. Okay, let's see. Lauren Walker has a question. How long do the imaging processes take? How many can you image in a day approximately using the digitization and the photogrammetry process? Yeah, that's a really good question. So the scanning is pretty quick. So when you watched in the video, that's how long it takes to scan a squeeze. That was not time-lapsed at all. So it's about 25 seconds, something like that, per scan. So for small squeezes that only need to be scanned the 2 times, you're talking about a minute total to do the scan. For larger squeezes, it gets more. If it's larger, like the one that I showed in the video, that's all of a sudden a minute and a half instead of a minute. If it's one of the ones that I mentioned that's more like 5 feet by 10 feet, one of the really huge squeezes, those take significantly longer, in part because they tend to be made of many pieces of paper and be fragile. And so we'll have multiple people doing the scanning so that it gets held up and supported. And so one of those can take 10, 15, 20 minutes to scan. But fortunately, there aren't a ton of those in the collection, so that doesn't tend to slow things down too much. So I think our expectation is that it's quite feasible to scan 60 squeezes in an hour, and the subsequent photoshopping, adjusting takes about the same amount of time. So you can get through 60 squeezes in 2 hours of total time. So it really does move pretty quickly. The photogrammetry process takes longer, and we're really, one of the main things that we're trying to figure out right now is how much we can automate that, and how we can automate that so that we can get through as much as we possibly can without having to assemble a room size robotic arm assembly or something like that. So when we did photo captures last week, if you're doing a photogrammetry capture and you're just shooting by hand a single squeeze, the capture portion probably takes somewhere between 2 minutes and 10 minutes, depending on how many pictures you're taking, how close you are, how difficult of a setup you've created for yourself. Because if you have it, kind of nicely set up against a wall or a piece of poster board, it's a lot easier to do than if it's on the floor and you're having to kind of lean over it and stabilize yourself and hold a relatively heavy camera. So that portion doesn't take terribly long, but 2 to 10 minutes per squeeze is a lot more than what you have on the 2D side. And the workup side on the computer is significantly more intensive. So that's done through a program called Agisoft Metashape Pro. And depending again on how many photos you take and how high definition you want the end product to be, that can take the computer somewhere between 4 and 10 hours to do. So one of the things that we really want to figure out with the automation process is how we can take a photo set of, say, 20, 40 squeezes at once, because then the computer can just be set to chunk, work through that, and we can cut out essentially the individual 3D meshes at the end. So I hope that answers the question there. Okay, let's see. Paula, you noted that you boost the contrast and reduce the brightness of the scans. Is there a particular metric that you found is best, or does it depend on the individual scan? That's a really good question. So we actually do not do this by individual scan, rather specifically for 2 reasons. One of them is that that process of trying to figure out, what's going to look absolutely best ends up taking a bunch of time, and that wasn't a place where we wanted people to be spending the time on this. And the other thing is that we were concerned with that, and with a variety of the things that we do, that we would be reading our biases into it. And so kind of creating something where there isn't necessarily something. So we apply the exact same brightness and contrast adjustments to every single squeeze. And as I mentioned in the video, we keep unaltered versions of them so that if there's any concern that by doing so we've created a letter where there wasn't a letter, or made it possible to read a letter where maybe it's just a mark on the stone, you can go back and look at the kind of untouched squeeze and see what you think about that. But yeah, and this is another one where we have several kind of documentation manuals of how to do this stuff, and that's all material that I'm very happy to share. So if you want to know, kind of what exactly the percent that we bump it up or down in Photoshop is, I'm very happy to share that. And it's something where you can kind of play depending on what your scanner is and what seems right to you. I think I would recommend doing the same kind of apply the same thing to every squeeze approach, but the exact numbers that you apply, that would be something that, it's not like we have a magic bullet for that. We've kind of just decided on what seemed best to us. Okay, a question from Georgia. Thank you for the presentation. Have you digitized the squeezes of JeanLuc Robert? So we have not digitized that collection yet. That collection is under the stewardship of Glenn Bowersock and Christopher Jones. And we have planned as part of the digitization project to digitize that collection for the same reasons as everything else, so that it can be made available if that's the desire of Glenn and Christopher, and so that we have the kind of preservation of them. So, if anything were, knock on wood, if anything were to go wrong, they would be preserved. So we're almost finished actually with doing the 2D scanning of the rest of the collection. And when we finish the rest of it, we'll sit down and have a conversation and see what they want to do that way, and hopefully move forward with that. Okay, another question from Lauren. Are people using IIIF to match fragments or compare versions? So our images that we put up online are IIIF compliant. I don't know whether anyone has used them yet specifically to find joins and match fragments to each other. I do know that we've had several people who have used the squeezes, the images of the squeezes, for publications that will have new readings of inscriptions, or for publications that are comparing kind of what is currently visible on the stone to what I guess would have been on the stone when the squeeze was made. Because of course that's another advantage to the squeezes, is they were made in mostly in 1935, 36. And although there's not a ton of change that happens to the squeezes while they're at the Agora Museum or the Epigraphic Museum, etc., there can be, very small things. And so if you're wondering about, a letter, whether it's an Omicron or a Theta or something like that, and you're not 100% certain whether what you're seeing is, an actual letter or just some kind of damage to the stone, you can get a check on, hey, this is what the surface looked like 80 years ago, see whether that helps that way. So yeah, the kind of comparing versions, that's definitely happening. The matching fragments, I don't know whether that's going on yet. And we're pretty open that, we want people to use these images for all of their work. And the only thing that we ask is that, if you do a publication with them, that you mention that the squeeze is from the Institute, and if possible, you send us a digital copy of whatever the publication is, so that we know what kind of work is being done with them. So we haven't gotten any articles or book chapters or anything like that yet, specifically saying that people are doing this, but hopefully it's something that's kind of going on in the background. Maria asked, when viewing the images in Albert, how much can you manipulate the image? Yeah, so we have an image viewer built into Albert that lets you do some amount of image manipulation directly there. Specifically, again, you can adjust the kind of brightness and contrast type values of the image there. So you can play with it in browser, just by clicking the way that I did in the video to bring up the image and adjust it that way. You can also download the files for any of the images, and then you can adjust them in any of the other myriad ways that Photoshop lets you play with things in Photoshop. So there are what I would say are some basic adjustments that you can do, and obviously when you do these adjustments, they're not done to the file. So you don't need to worry that anything you do when you're looking at the files in Albert will affect the files that we've got on the database. But there's some basic things that you can do with those images to help yourself try to see what's on them. And I think although those are basic things, they're probably also some of the most useful things at the end of the day. The kind of brightness and contrast is just honestly one of the best ways of trying to see better what's in the image. So although you can do other things with Photoshop, it's kind of diminishing returns in some ways. And also what percent of the collection has already been scanned? So as I was saying, most of it at this point has been scanned. I think we're probably up around, I would say 80 to 90% of the collection has been scanned at this point. And almost all of the material that's been scanned has been photoshopped and edited. Less of it is available at the moment for two reasons. One of them is, as I mentioned in the video, we like to provide just the kind of a basic amount of metadata, usually about the inscription, because most of the epigraphists and historians and classicists who are going to work with these aren't necessarily going to want to know or be searching by a squeeze that was made in X year versus Y year. It's the information about the squeezes isn't necessarily what's as important as the information about the inscription. So was this an honorific decree? Was this a gravestone of some kind? Was this erected in the 4th century BCE? Was this erected in the 2nd century CE? Where was it? Where does it come from? Is it Athens? Is it from Thessaloniki? That kind of thing. So collecting that metadata and putting that metadata into a format where it can be applied to the squeezes takes time as well. So we've got kind of a large body of material that we are sort of ready to put online and open access, where we're mostly waiting to update kind of how we display these things in Albert and what our sort of underlying infrastructure is that way. But when we get that worked out, and that, as is the case with a lot of things, has been kind of delayed, unfortunately, by the pandemic, throwing everybody a wrench. But when that gets worked out, we'll have these up online. And one of the changes that we're making is we're going to be putting all of the kind of metadata that we're gathering, both about the squeezes and about the inscriptions, into Epidoc XML. Which will allow that information to be much more easily drawn upon and connected to other digital epigraphy projects, since that's kind of the lingua franca of digital epigraphy. Yes, and thank you, Maria. Maria shared the link to the Krateros homepage in the chat. So if you're interested, you can wander by there, and that has all sorts of information about the project, about how we do the digitization, about the squeeze collection and its history, and also has a link to Albert, to the database on there as well, which Maria has also linked. And so again, very welcome to do that. You'll notice that we, as I was kind of just alluding to, we have not uploaded new material to Albert in a little while, but we still have several thousand images on there already. And at some point, I'm kind of hoping within the next couple of months, maybe over this summer, there'll be a huge image dump, and most of the rest of the published material will become open access and available.
A quick question about that, Aaron. How do you advertise that the new collections are available?
Yeah, so at the moment, we haven't done that yet. I think what we will do, certainly there's a Krateros Instagram page, which to this point has mostly just shared images of interesting squeezes and stuff in the collection, along with some historical and philological commentary from time to time. And that would be a place where we would mention any large data drops. It'll also be something that we definitely share on the Liverpool Classics listserv. It'll be something that we're actually in the process of creating kind of a news slash updates from the team section of the website. And that would be a place where we would explain if there was a large new tranche of material released, what was in there, how to access it, all that kind of thing. I think if anyone has a question in there that I didn't see or that I haven't gotten to, please feel free to speak up. I'm not doing it on purpose.
Well, in any case, thanks, Aaron, for welcoming us to the Krateros home. It's been amazing. And I really thank for all the effort and the care that you put in on the collection. And it's been very kind of like, although I'm here at the Institute, it's very eye-opening to see all the details that I had missed and never learned of. And before we say goodbye, I want to mention that on April 14th, in a joint venture with the IAS Near Eastern Studies, we will present Biblioteca Arabica, a digital home for the Arabic manuscript tradition. We thank you all for attending today's sessions and hope to see you all again in future events. And thank you, Aaron, very much for all your effort and of your team.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thanks again to all of you for coming and for the fantastic questions. Our email address for contact is on the website. If you think of any questions later on that you wish you had asked, send an email. I always keep track of that, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.